everybody, John Millen here with Benefit Hackers. I'm excited to have Michael Chase with me. Michael, thanks for joining us. Michael is a senior advisor for One America, and he is the guru when it comes to many different lines of coverage, right? You call yourself a guru. Michael, don't you every once in a while?
I try to be an expert on what we do on a good day.
No, so all seriousness, Michael, I've known him for a number of years, and we're going to talk about a couple different topics today. So, Michael, I appreciate you being on here. You have so much wisdom and knowledge and experience. You've helped us out a lot, and a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this or watching this are going to be business owners, HR directors, CFOs, people involved in the benefits industry, and I know that's what you focus on as well. So, first of all, thanks for being on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, all right. So the first question, we're going to talk a little bit about income protection. And it's a really valid topic now with people getting sick with COVID, right? With people getting sick without COVID, with people not able to work. So protecting their income stream is a big deal. Tell me why, like when you talk to an employer or an HR person, they're like, disability insurance is not worth it. Tell me just generally, why is it that disability insurance generally is important?
Well, I think many times insurance carriers can make it confusing for employees. And when things are confusing, not easy to understand, they take a back seat. I joke many times that LTD stands for last thing discussed because people talk about the health, the dental, and then they're like, okay, what about the LTD? And it becomes very rate oriented. To me, outside of medical, disability is probably one of the most important types of coverage you can have. I mean, it's paycheck protection is really what it is. And if you're not protecting your paycheck, we've seen it. I mean, one out of every three men under age of 45 are disabled at some point. So it's extremely important to, especially, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I've got 3 kids. If I don't have an income coming in and I'm hurt off the job, I've just got to be very careful of that and make sure I'm protected. So I just think it's extremely, extremely important to have that income. I think one of the things that I've seen over the years is people will choose dental over LTD, and they use it. That's why they take it. They see $1,500, but when you can get disability for $1,500 per week, you just got to sometimes weigh it out and look at it. So the easier we can make it as a carrier to the employee to understand, the better people are informed.
That's really good, and you're right. It's sometimes in those benefit packages we don't get, like dental insurance. I get my teeth cleaned hopefully twice a year. I don't file a disability claim all the time, but if you talk to anybody that's ever had a disability claim, they're like, "This is important."
Absolutely.
So we don't want to wait. We don't want to wait till you get to that point. And you're right. The brokerage community, the benefit advisor community, they just don't spend enough time on it. And you said after medical, you think it's one of the most important things. And I've been shifting that conversation up sooner right after that. So I think that's great.
Yeah. And as you know, we'll talk about, but there's a lot of details. I think so often people just look at the rate and think all contracts are equal. They're not. They're similar, but there's a lot of moving pieces. And depending on how that contract's written, clauses that can be in there. I mean, you've got to really, really be a student of the game to make sure that at the end of the day, the carrier's there when the customer needs you most and be at that pay window. Not say, "Oops, sorry, we've got this provision in the contract that won't pay." I mean, I think it's very important. So.
Yep. So that's an excellent point. So now I want to shift a little bit towards, there's 2 types of disability coverages. There's shorter term. It's called short-term disability. There's longer-term disability. Tell me a little bit about something. Share some ideas with people that they may not be considering. Like, when do you offer both? If you had to pick one, is an employer paid? If you have to do voluntary, like what's some best practices that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all a preference on budgets, what groups are looking to accomplish. Many times I've seen groups where an employer will pay for LTD for employees, and they'll pay for it for anyone that selects short-term disability. So it's kind of like, hey, if you take short-term, I'll buy you long-term. So we've seen some of that. I think a lot of us think of short-term, especially because it has the maternity, inclusion on it. So bottom line is, maternity is treated as any other injury or illness. So when you're into an industry such as a school that has a high female population, short-term is a big draw. People want it. They know how it works, and it's a key benefit to people. I think LTD people are like, that will never happen to me. But if you look at the statistics, it happens. I mean, it really happens. I mean, knock on wood, I'll be 48 this year. I've never been disabled. I've been hurt. But thankfully I've never needed that, but that's not the case for so many folks. And so again, it's a the beauty, and people always ask, should it be voluntary or employer paid? It's an amazing benefit when the employer pays for it. What a nice gesture on the employer standpoint, and it's money out of their pocket. If there's a negative, it's that it's going to be a taxable benefit, which leads to a whole nother conversation, especially when you have higher earners. A lot of people say, oh, I got 60% to $5,000. Well, then it's taxable. What happens to the executives that are making $250,000 a year? Does that $5,000 taxed? That really isn't going to cover their everyday needs. So LTD, I love it. It's kind of a puzzle. I love figuring out what people need. I don't view it as sales. I view it as being a solution, bringing a solution to the table. Because the last thing you want is a hire, anybody specifically, but even a hire earner who thinks they're taken care of. They get into a benefit that, oh, my company will take care of me. And then they find out they're getting $4,000 a month of benefit if they're lucky, So it's just, again, one question leads to the next, which leads to the next. But it's a great opportunity as a broker to have conversations with their HR director or benefits manager to explore this stuff. Because these are key details.
So. You're so right. And, when I have conversation with employers that don't have it now, I say, look, this is the scenario. At least this is my perspective. You tell me if I'm off. I say, assume someone in your workforce that's a really key employee gets injured or sick, and they can't work for 4 months without any disability coverage. The likelihood they're going to come back after being in the hole that deep, not getting paid, is close to zero. Versus you've paid a little benefit for them that's kicking in a massive amount of money to protect 60%. They are at least recovering, and now when they're recovered, they will most likely come back to you. And a lot of business owners have never thought of it that way, that you're doing this to protect your business. This is not just some free handout, right? Have you heard of anything like that? How do you explain it to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking care of your employees. I mean, it's giving them an opportunity. I mean, One America provides us, obviously, a wonderful benefit, and we have the opportunity to pay for it, or they'll pay for it. But I choose to pay for it myself because I want the tax-free benefit if I ever need it. But the number one cost of foreclosures is disabilities. I mean, foreclosures on their homes. I mean, people can't make payments. I mean, look at what's going on today with COVID. I mean, we're hearing, okay, now people aren't paying their mortgages. And I think that's going to, that's one of the first things that goes. So it's really important. The one thing I hear too, that people don't sometimes want to provide benefits, LTD or STD specifically, is, oh, well, my employees will get comfortable. They won't work. They'll stay at home watching TV and get more comfortable. The truth is, if any group carrier is going to manage those claims appropriately, people can't sit at home. When you're out of work and a carrier is paying, they're working with you. I think many times people perceive and business owners that people will view it as a retirement vehicle. It's not. It is the purpose of disability is to help you in time of need and to get you back to work. And no carrier is going to let you sit there and just eat bonbons and watch reruns and for the next 30 years. That's not how it works.
That's a really good point, because I hear that more often than you'd think, and you hear it a lot too. What are the things what are the hoops that someone has to go through? Let's say they're like, hey, we're going to game the system. I'm going to pretend like I have a short-term need. What are some checks and balances along the way that keep that at bay?
Well, everything's driven by the physician. So, I mean, the physician, it's not like the carriers are saying, hey, they're making the decisions. They're looking at the medical records. Every carrier has physicians on staff, so it's peer-to-peer. Many times, we have physicians on staff that will speak to a disabled employee's physician. Just again, peer-to-peer. How can we get folks back to work? Really, just again, it's never to be negative. Sometimes, listen, you could never pay me enough to be a claims examiner. It is a brutal, brutal job. It's emotional for the person on the other line. They're disabled, which physically, but then there's a mental aspect to it. So I think you have to keep all those things in mind, which bring emotion, but you have to follow through with a number of things, and that's why we always get disability dates. You're disabled through X date, which is a couple of 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you've got to continue, under the care of a physician. So there's a lot of checks and balances there, and I'll tell you, there is fraud that goes on. Do you know where we get most of our feedback from on fraud? Our HR professionals. They call and they're like, okay, I'm hearing stories about my employee. Don't say it was me, but just heads up, you may want to check this claim. And we hear that. So, so I guess like everything in the world, you'll have people that try to take advantage of the system, but most group carriers out there, they've got a process. They've got a way to manage it. And again, at the end of the day, the goal is to get people back to work to a fully, look at what we're doing today. How many people want to go back to work? They're bored, right? I'm dying to get out of this. Yeah, I get tired of driving, but I tell you, I am dying to get some windshield time. So,
That's good feedback. Because a lot of people sometimes the employers will base their whole benefit package on a bad story from 10 years ago. I'm like, don't penalize your entire workforce today. Get the right carrier, get the right metrics. And, sometimes you got to fire an employee. Some employers don't like to fire anybody. It's like, the real issue is here, you won't fire them. It has nothing to do with the disability claim.
No.
You don't want to let them go.
So, absolutely.
That's awesome. All right, let me talk a little bit more about taxability. This is probably the biggest deer in the headlights look that I see when I explain to people. You look at their employee booklet, right? And it says 60%, $5,000 a month. And sometimes it doesn't say anything in there that it's taxable. And I've been in, Michael, hundreds of open enrollment meetings over 18 years. Hundreds and hundreds. Rarely have I ever heard someone, unless we're doing it, standing in front of the room say, by the way, most likely you're not getting the full 60%. Because they feel bad, they don't know. Talk to me about that issue.
Yeah, it's real simple. We look at it, if the employer is paying whatever portion the employer pays for, that benefit is taxable. Bottom line. So if the employer is providing the cost, it's going to be taxable. So depending on your tax bracket, if it's a 60% benefit, most people will take home between 37 and 43%. All right. Not many people can live on 37 to 43%. And then again, goes back to our conversation with people that are high earners. That can even be a lower percentage. So I'm a big fan. I encourage folks, it's a preference, but I know the impact of when people go out on claim. I love tax-free benefits. That way, if it's an employee paid with after-tax dollars, it's a tax-free benefit. Every once in a while, and I don't encourage this, we'll see a voluntary benefit, voluntary short-term or long-term, but people will run it through their Section 125. Not a good idea. The employee's paying for it. Now it's going to be taxable. I think if it's a heavy blue collar, maybe makes sense. But generally speaking, never make it. A tax-free benefit is ideal. So I always tell people if they want to provide money towards a benefit, buy a group life insurance. Put it towards dental. Don't do it on the voluntary. Another side with just a quick note on that. And people don't always understand this either. They said, what if I pay for half of my benefit? What if I make a 50% contribution? The challenge with that on a disability carrier standpoint is then you get into plan designs, whether it's voluntary or contributory. And if the employer is making a contribution, the benefit, the participation requirement goes up. Well, LTD, the participation massively impacts the rate. So you got to be careful of that. If the employer says, I want to pay 50%, figure out a plan design, figure out maybe a way to pay for one and not the other, because it does add another layer of complication in there when it comes to participation.
That's a really good point, because you would think, hey, I'm paying half the dental at $30 a month. I'm going to pay half the LTD. If you want it, I'll kick in the other half. And from a risk perspective, you guys are balancing that risk, right? All the sicker people, the people that think they may need it, over time rush in.
It does. It gets really complicated. So, So we do one thing that we do a lot of is, and not to bore you with all the details, but Section 162A of the IRS code allows you to what we call, is referred to as a gross up. And in essence, I always encourage people, I'm not a tax guy, a tax consultant, check with your CPA, but it's a way to gross up an employee's earnings to cover the premium. Therefore, they're paying taxes on that premium. And the beautiful thing is they get a tax-free benefit. So in essence, it's 100% employee pay with 100% participation. And because they're paying taxes on it, whether it's comes out of their paycheck weekly or they do it at the W-2 at the end of the year, it's a wonderful way to have a tax-free benefit.
That's an excellent point. That's worth listening to this whole thing.
Yeah.
Just at that point, I'm gonna tell you a story. So I was talking to my partner and wife Laura about this interview and about taxability, and she said when her first job was with a CPA firm, an auditing firm in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
She gets her first paycheck. Now this is that's a while ago. I'm not gonna say how long. And she's like, why am I paying for what's this LTD that I'm paying for that shows up? And she went to them and said, well, I don't want this. They said, no, you're not paying for it. Yeah, it is. It's coming out of my paycheck. And that was a gross up.
Yeah.
And that was a CPA firm that someone was either really smart in there or they had a really good agent.
Yeah. I actually, embarrassing enough, but I learned about it 15 years ago from a customer. He sent me a letter. This is what he wanted to do. And I was, I'd been in the business like 3 or 4 years, and I was like, what? I didn't know. So I learned. I'm a student of the business. I learned, and I think people want to think it's complicated. It's not, and I say, check with your CPA. They know what to do. And so it's a wonderful way to have a benefit tax-free and make it simple and no complications.
Excellent. That's one thing I like about working with you, Michael. Like I've sent you some cases. I'm like, okay, if you were building this from scratch based on these issues, this demographic, this workforce, what do you suggest? Because a lot of times as health agents or advisors, we think and I've done this before. Hey, just quote this. Just this is what I want. And I'm learning over time, like, maybe I should ask you, like, am I missing something here? Because I don't do this all day long. And that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think you just have to. And people, not everything works for every person, every group, and that's. I've been at One America going on 21 years, and there's a lot of good carriers out there, but it's kind of the bigger carriers. They're kind of stuck in their box. They don't have a lot of flexibility, and One America is an A+ rated, $82 billion company, but we're nimble, and that's why one of the reasons I love being able to bring solutions. And every group I get, I'm like, okay, I see what you have. How can we improve it and potentially save you some money? And I'm not a puzzle guy, but that's a puzzle to me, and I love trying to figure that stuff out. Again, just being of value.
That's why we get along. I like doing the same thing. And in fact, I did it this week. We talked to a prospect group. They had a 6-month wait on their LTD, and after talking to you, we rearranged it. We moved it to a 90-day, and the price went up. But I tell people all the time, look, I'm not about giving you the lowest price. I'm about giving you the best value. And when I shared to them why I'm recommending it, it wasn't that much more money in a year. It was like $2,000. It was not a lot of money, but it was a huge impact to someone that had to go on that claim.
Absolutely.
So they love that.
Makes it clean.
All right, I'm going to get a little technical now, a little geeky on you. All right. So, so you talked about contracts, right? So this is a contract that the employer signs with you guys or with the carrier that says, in return for this premium, we will protect you in these ways. And it's a contract. Most people have never read the contract. Maybe some people have. You've read them. There's language in contracts that can be very different. One of them is this thing called and versus or definition of disability. And it's one word essentially in a contract. Educate us about what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, when people say, sometimes I'll get folks and they think they're smart, and I get it. There's certain carrier reps that lead with that, and they'll say, well, Mike, is yours an and or definition? I said, well, what do you mean? I come back with a question, and they're like, well, what is it? And I said, well, what are you looking for? So in essence, an or definition means you have to have a loss of earnings or a loss of duties. Okay. An and definition means you have to have a loss of duties and a loss of earnings. Okay. So in theory, or would be a better contract, right? But the question is, when does that come into play? Because I always ask, again, I go back and say, well, when does this matter? It really matters during the elimination period. That's what matters. So And I can tell you, because again, I have this conversation with most folks. I mean, ours is an or definition during the elimination period. So to start the elimination period, you have to have a loss of duties, again, your work, or a loss of earnings. Okay. After the elimination period at 90 days, well, you have to have a loss of both. Obviously, if you don't have a loss of earnings, what's a carrier going to pay? Right? There's no benefit to pay. So it's really, it kind of gets in the weeds. I mean, it is a big deal, but there's 23 moving pieces to a disability contract. And I teach a class on this, just kind of from A to Z. And it's funny, if you took the best of those 23 versus the worst of those 23, you can in essence double or triple a rate, a group rate. And because there's cost and containment language out there, there's just a ton of moving pieces. So I'm big on education. As I started it saying about people are looking at rates only. If you don't pay attention to these 23 moving pieces, you may not, the carrier may not be there at the pay window when you need them. So it's really important to focus on that. So again, and or definition is one of 23 moving pieces. But again, I think in the perfect world, yes, or would be generally better. But at the end of the day, what are you trying to get to? And that's the most important piece.
Yeah, the good news is that all these 23 pieces. I probably know 2 of them, 3 of them, but it's if you think about a long-term disability payout, it could be millions of dollars, right? That's what's at stake. It's not a $10,000 death benefit claim. It could be a $2 or $3 million settlement over time, which is why it's so important to understand what you're signing, what you're getting into.
It is, and I always tell folks, you gotta. When you're signing up, you've got to look at, Mr. Employer, you may only be with the company, your carrier that you're choosing, for 2 or 3 years. One of your employees could be with him for 30. So think about that, because if the carrier terminates and someone's on disability, well, that individual stays with that carrier. So it's really important when you're making a decision to make sure you're with a good carrier, someone that's going to, again, be at the pay window when they need you most, because it could be a long-term relationship. Really could.
It's a really interesting point. I've never thought about that. I know that One America is highly ranked and rated with Comdex and all the different the metrics, all the different agencies. So you're right. So you change carriers, if someone's on claim, they don't move over to the new carrier.
No, they stay with us. So absolutely. So it's really important to choose. Again, I think back in the financial crisis, the last crisis we had in the U.S., everybody was looking at how the stability, and when AIG went under, I was like, what? How did they go under? And I think that's when people started looking closer at these at the financials of carriers. And I think it's not as precedent as it was then, but people still look at that. They really look. And if you sometimes look at the greatest or the highest Comdex scores, they're typically with mutual companies. Mutual companies are owned by their policy, or they have a different. Well, they're just mutual company is owned. I mean, they don't report to Wall Street. They report to Main Street. They are there they're owned by their policyholders. Stock companies, I mean, they've got earners, right? They've got stockholders they've got to make money for. So it's a completely different. I've worked on both, or for both. I've worked for a stock company. I'll never not work for a mutual company. It's just a completely different way. It doesn't mean they're not trying to make money. It doesn't mean they're not focused on the same things, but it just kind of has a different mentality of when it comes to being there for their customers.
That's a great point, because a lot of times people look at the name of the carrier and like, they're all the same, and now you're even seeing players coming in from the medical side, right? From so it's coming in all over the place, and you're trying to consolidate vendors, and I understand all that, but it's a pretty important decision.
It is. You bring up a great point. I think it's one of my biggest challenges I have now is when the medical carriers participate, and they're like, hey, we'll give you 2, 3, 4% off on medical if you put your ancillary with us. And I get it for life insurance. I mean, you can't really argue, right? But disability, you better dig into those contracts, because you got, not that they're doing anything malicious, but they are medical carriers. They are not ancillary carriers. They are not experts in disability. And I think that's the thing employers need to really be careful of, because if you choose it to save a few percentage points on your medical, and John, a lot of times the math doesn't make sense. I mean, they're going to give them $100,000 savings on medical, but the ancillary is only worth 30. It just doesn't make sense. But again, what you don't want to do is, sacrifice the integrity of your disability plan for savings on your medical. And that, I've seen it. I lose many times because of that. And again, I hope, hope people never get in a situation where they didn't have the right coverage.
Yeah. And my take on that is, look, if you want to save up to 4%, it's going to be your 1 year savings, right?
Absolutely.
They're not in the business of losing that money, number one. Number two, the coverage is maybe not what it needs to be. But number three, if you're the advisor and you're banking, your only value is saving 3% because you consolidate vendors, you got a bigger problem. Saving 3% these days, I mean, I saved the client that you and I are working on now, they got a 32% increase. And we got it down to 7, and we got them better coverage.
That's awesome.
So if all you got up your bag of tricks is a little consolidation for 2-3%, you're in trouble because your costs are escalating.
You're right, John. That's what makes you guys so unique and so good at what you do, because that's bringing solutions, right? I learned this when I first got in the business. I had an RVP, and he said, be an asset, don't be a liability. So you always try to, whether I'm speaking to my broker partners or you're speaking to your customer or potential customers, be an asset. We're here to help you grow, help you have the best benefit package for your employees.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, man. Any other things you want to talk about before we wrap up? Anything on your mind or anything that you think would really help? Like if you're talking to a room full of decision makers right now, HR, CFO, like heading into the end of 2020, coming out of COVID, a lot of renewals are going to happen between now and January. 70% of companies will renew. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, what we're seeing now is I think retention is going to be at a record high this year. A lot of people are not moving. They don't want to mess with it. They're worried about keeping their businesses open. So I think from a retention standpoint, depending on how long this we just had a call an hour ago about kind of a weekly update. Depending on how long this goes, obviously the longer it goes, it creates more financial stress. So we're hoping, obviously, just like everybody else, that once we get through this, everyone's back to work safely, that it will open it up and business will keep moving, picking up. There's some thoughts out there from the big reinsurers, the bigger carriers, that the core products will be important. Those will be what people are, obviously medical, but the life and disability will be on the front burner, where the cancers, the critical illnesses, those will be kind of on a back burner. As people are getting their incomes going, back to work, kind of getting back into the swing of things. So if I can encourage customers, brokers, really don't shy away from digging into the weeds on your LTD and your disability contracts. People spend more time shopping for a couch or furniture than they do looking at their employee benefits each year. I think someone said people spend on average 3 hours looking at their couch, looking for a new couch a year, and they spend 32 minutes on their employee benefits. So, don't spend 3 hours, but definitely ask questions. Look for ways to improve it, and just don't say, okay, this is great, let's move it on, because companies evolve, companies grow, and the contract you had in place 5 years ago may not fit for you today. And I just think it's really important to do things like that and stay with the times. So that's my encouragement.
I think you're absolutely right. And this year is going to be the year that we are telling people to really look at what coverages you have, not just medical, but things like disability, life insurance. I'm seeing employers now consider paying for employer paid life, $10,000, $15,000. And these are low cost options that you also have voluntary buy-ups that help. But I think these are low cost options. Everyone is looking, what can we do better this year coming out of this? So
Absolutely.
Great feedback. So, Michael, I know you're on LinkedIn. So Michael Chase, you can find him on LinkedIn. Is that the easiest way to find you?
Sure. Absolutely. All my contact information's out there.
So he's a great asset. And I would say, I've learned a lot just by being open-minded, asking questions. You've always been educational, but that's what we need as advisors when we convey, like, what's the rationale, so I can explain generally what it means.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Love. Thank you for the opportunity. This is fun. And again, getting the word out there about the education and the importance of life and disabilities, just people need it. They definitely need it. So.
All right, I got one more bonus. I got one more bonus question here.
Sure.
All right, bonus question. A little bit off left field.
Okay.
The number of questions that have been raised this year of, if I'm in quarantine for COVID Is that a disability claim? I've seen all kinds of stuff. Do you think, and I know you're not One America, you don't make that call, but can you see any major changes coming to contracts based on what we just went through?
No, most carriers, I think majority of carriers have made the same decisions that whenever if people were going out, let's say their hours were reduced, they were furloughed, whatever it may be, I'm going to throw a date out there, but let's say whatever their status was as of March 1st, that will be their status if there's a claim. So even if they're on reduced hours, reduced earnings, now employers still need to pay the same premium. Hypothetically, you're making $35,000, you're cut to $25,000 or $20,000. You still need to pay premium on that higher amount on the $35,000, but you will still receive a benefit, or I should say, a claim will be handled the same way. So what carriers didn't want to do was go endorse every contract. Can you imagine if every carrier changed their contracts to COVID and then, okay, now we've got to change it back? It's a nightmare. So most people just made an administrative call on it. I think there'll be a closure date at some point. Some carriers came out up front and said, hey, we'll do this from March 1 to June 30th. Some saying July. We didn't put a date out there. And the reason is no one knows how long this thing's going to go. And we didn't want to keep upping that. So we're, one of the things I love about working for One America is we do the right thing. Sometimes we're not the quickest out the gate, but hey, let's do what's the right thing to do and the fair thing. So that was our approach of making sure that the employees are taken care of. And we hope, looks like everybody, we hope this is a once in a lifetime situation we're going through, right? So so I think that's the big thing. Just continue for employers to continue, check with their carrier, but to continue to pay premium on the volumes or the salaries that were in force prior to COVID.
Good topic. Good way to wrap up. Michael, thanks again. Appreciate it. Have a safe rest of the week, and we'll connect soon.
Thanks, John. Have a great day. Thanks for your time.
You bet. See you.